issues, and data is the lifeblood, if you will, of what media is all about, especially in television and media. So we have three experts on the topic. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and what companies they're with. All of them are worth your time and effort. I believe all of you are presenting or will have a space over in the SPROCKIT venue, which is just down the road here, down the hallway. I encourage you all to go not only to SPROCKIT generally and be amazed at all the various startups, but these three in particular, to learn more about some of the topics that we're going to kind of just scrape the surface of here this morning. So why don't we start with Zach at the end there, wearing his smart Limbik cap, in case you didn't know what company you work for. Who are you, and what's your company do? Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, Zach Schwitzky. Thanks, Tim. I'm a co-founder of a company called Limbik. We're a data studio for short-form video. As a former baseball player, current baseball fan, the way I like to describe it is sabermetrics for short-form video. We use big data and predictive analytics to help creative and editorial teams at brands, creative agencies, publishers, media companies tell better stories with video. So your focus tends to be more on digital video-centric publishers, right? Which, by the way, could also include broadcasters and networks and all those kinds of folks who, but literally get data infused into the analytics, the use cases, the targeting, content decision-making, etc. for those kinds of purveyors. Yeah, we like to get involved as early on in the creative process as possible. What we found was there's a lot of options out there to use data to distribute the content once you have it, target the right audiences, etc. But there wasn't a lot of options to use data effectively to make decisions about the content. So you're creating, packaging up, depending on the type of video publisher, to speak broadly. So we saw an opportunity, very much like Netflix has done internally, to use data to commission original content, and said, you know, I think depending on where you look, 95% of companies now use video, so it's, you know, become table stakes, and there we saw an opportunity to use big data, predictive analytics to help make better content decisions early on in the creative process. All right, so give us one quick example of, say, a publisher or a media company that is putting out and publishing short form video and the data. Can you give us an example or two? Yeah, so there's two kind of general use cases for editorial, where a big publisher is creating, you know, 50 to 100 pieces of content a day, that each video individually, you know, the stakes aren't real high, so it's more kind of topically, contextually, what type of content is resonating, how do they reach new audiences, and so kind of against the creative calendar, giving them ideas based on a network that we've compiled that's you know, hundreds of thousands of videos, where we can look at the type of content that's resonating, and then on a so like a TV station, news organization with tons of video, or a magazine publisher, quote unquote, that has dozens of videos that they're publishing newsworthy every day, all day. That exactly. Kind of stuff? Okay. Yeah, and then like branded content opportunities, where, you know, I'll use L'Oreal as an example. They had talent attached to this thing, and it was a skincare product. It was going to be a series, and so with those kind of parameters and their desired or their objectives, you know, we can look at different opportunities, from, you know, the morning routine that are going to resonate, making coffee, getting out of bed, and things to stay away from, like, you know, her wearing an orange robe versus a red robe. So there's a lot of opportunities to, you know, use data to make better decisions around video. Got it. Thomas, why don't you explain what you do, and in particular, why you're wearing orange?
Absolutely. Hi, Thomas Martin. I'm a former CIO at General Electric, and now I work as a startup integrator. Big Co, Small Co is my company, and orange is our color. But I spend my time now working with and advising startups, as well as integrating them into large co-enterprise. But the experience that I had with big data at GE was really about taking massive data sets, data lakes actually, migrating them to cloud-based infrastructure, ensuring it was secure, but also laying out strategies around how do you move from a bit of the rearview mirror of what happened to how do you begin to look at predictive analytics. I did have the benefit of physics, which people are a little different, but certainly a lot of those strategy sets are very similar.
So it sounds like that's one of the sort of the biggest issues, right? So if you take a look at sort of point solutions or progenitors, if you will, of data, right, or progenitors of data, that's wonderful, but the problem is you're going to have many feeds, it would seem, of data, right? And depending on your organization, how the hell do you deal with all of it, combine it, and/or equate it, and then make decisions out of it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, how do you decipher between the two? I mean, I had the real benefit of, from a metallurgical perspective, we know once so much heat is added to a metal, what it's going to react to and predictively respond to. And I think the whole human element, even as myself, I mean, if you were to look at my data feed, you're going to see Monday through Friday, the wife and I look at very specific channels, but on Saturday and Sunday, it's HDTV all day. But I wasn't actually sitting there watching it. How do you decipher between, the actual interaction of my watching a certain program, as well as how does that turn into what advertisers I may consume when?
All right, so Marty, why don't you explain what you have founded and run as well?
Yeah, so we started a company called Wicket Labs, and essentially we're the big data department for traditional media companies, broadcasters, cable companies, as well as some new media companies as well. We help them aggregate data from the 10 to 14 different systems they're employing today, from marketing systems to subscriber systems to engagement systems, advertising. We bring all that data together, we harmonize that data, and then we present it back in a way that tells a story that they can actually take action on and essentially help drive their business forward in a data-driven way. So
give us some examples of the types of data that you are getting and that you're trying to help harmonize, because I suspect, depending on who's asking, right, if I'm a television broadcaster, it might be a little different or maybe a lot different than, say, I don't know, a Hearst magazine title that fancies themselves as being now a video company, right, and various folks in between. That's
right. Well, if you step back, traditional media companies have had a challenge in that they've never actually had to understand their audience before. They've had two customers, advertisers and distributors, like the cable companies. Now, they actually have to have a direct relationship with their audience, and that relationship is manifested in data. And it's a new relationship. Before, Nielsen would just tell them what approximated their audience base. So we're helping them understand things like, we'll take marketing data and we'll source that all the way through the subscription life cycle to say, hey, your ads are doing really well, but man, you're getting a lot of churn. They're churning out of your system later on. You're not going to see that from a marketing system that just says, hey, I signed up a bunch of trials, celebrate. You have to actually track that whole life cycle of the customer to understand that value proposition on those advertising wasn't working very well. Another example might be to say, we can actually break down an audience based on cohorts to say, if you watch one video per session or two videos per session, what's your overall lifetime value inside of that service? So we, again, marry together series data, metadata about the content with that subscriber and revenue data to really understand. Now, for a product team, what that means is if I introduce a new recommendation engine, if I change the carousel, if I do an auto start at the end of a play, I actually understand what material benefit is coming back to the company in terms of an increased engagement with that audience and in terms of more revenue coming back to that company. So
there are two really important takeaways I want to underline here, one of which you explicitly said and one was sort of implicit. Let me start with the implicit. I think there are a ton of companies, right, that are popping up to essentially be big data, like aggregators, integrators, and whatever, right? To me, it feels like the definer needs to continue big data for ... right? And in many respects, right, some level of focus. I'm not saying that various big data companies can't tackle many different vertical solutions, but like a lot of other industries, the media industry, and more granularly, the TV and/or video and/or advertising industries are unique, right? And even within that, they're unique, right? So I guess you don't have a one shape or solution for every client of yours, right?
No, that's exactly right. But that's once we have this data set, that's kind of the beauty of machine learning and applying it to this data set, because the data naturally clusters. So one of the things we just introduced was, we call it our customer happiness index, or our chi score, and we rank all the audience members on how happy they are.
Have you trademarked that yet?
We have actually. You know, and so if we look at that chi score, the idea is you look at that data and there's natural patterns that actually start to come together of your audience together. So once we see those clusters, we put a friendly name on it. So we've identified the lunchable cluster, and these are people that dial in at noon every day, starting on the East Coast, and they catch up for about 30 minutes of their favorite show, and they tune in about 3 days a week, and they're just super happy. Versus another profile is, we call them the burn and churns. They come in, they just consume a ton of content. They look like they're really happy based on how active they are, but their pattern manifests, and it would be predicted that they're actually going to burn out of your content library, or what they perceive as your available content library, and bail out of your system and churn out. So those are the types of things where, to your point, everybody's a little different. The cool thing about machine learning is it kind of naturally groups your customers together, your audience together in a unique way for your business.
And here's the other thing I wanted to pull out, and then I want to segue and make sure you guys jump in too. You said it before, and I want to underline it, right? The quote-unquote television business or industry, right? Cable networks, TV broadcasters, TV stations, whatever, has never really been about consumers. It is, but it's really not. They don't sell anything really to consumers. They sell attention, right, and the advertising opportunities against that, and subscriptions and stuff. But the reality is, it's a wholesale business. It always has been, right? Where the station is wholesaling the audience to advertisers, or in the cable world, right? It's the business relationship, the customer data, the billing relationship lives with the network operator, who is deciding whether to pay for and pass along costs at margin to the end user. All of a sudden, it seems, right, but it has not all of a sudden, right? There is now this absolute opportunity, relatively straightforward and streamlined, to go directly to the consumer, right? And if I'm a television network or programmer or a station or whatever, that's either a huge opportunity or a mind-blowing fear that gets me out of the business, right? Because I don't know customer billing, I don't know customer data, CRM, how to target market to audiences, and that's where the digital world kind of already is well manifest, right?
Yeah, no question. I think attention is the key, and sort of whether you're selling against it or need it to get the consumer to do anything, buy a product. Video is a great opportunity to capture attention, and what we see, sort of what Marty was saying, is when it comes to creating video, if capturing attention is the success metric, and in our opinion it should be, depending on the type of content, the kind of metadata, how long is it, if you know what to look for, have the ability to look for these certain signals, you can create video against it. I'll give you one example. We were working with a digital publisher, creates a ton of recipe videos, and two very similar videos were performing very differently. One was performing really well, one was performing terribly, and we looked at them, and I think at all the different attributes we could identify, about 55 of the attributes we identified across the two videos were shared. So they were very similar, and the two things that we determined were driving such a difference in engagement or attention were the nail polish color of the woman making the recipe and the number of shot cuts in the first 10 seconds. Two critically important things for recipe videos that feature sweet foods or desserts, and service was where they use something you can make at home, right? So that's not going to be true for every type of video, but for this video it was. So they, in post-production, 30 seconds changed from 2 shots in the first 10 seconds to 6, and reposted it, and the attention, as we measure it, or as they measure it, went up by 42% over the next 7 days. So I think if you know what you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve, there's big opportunities out there, and for kind of traditional media companies that are packaging up content as ways to engage new audiences, big opportunities.
But Thomas, let me ask you this. So I have seen this in the earliest days of television when TiVo came about and said, we can tell people how they push their buttons and set-top box data and that kind of stuff, which on one level seems very amazingly appealing, right? But when you then start to deliver those data sets relatively raw and not necessarily streamlined or curated or whatever, it just becomes analysis paralysis, like, oh my God, and there's so many little intricacies of that data. How do you get over internally, say with bigger organizations or those who are not used to having a plethora of data sources, to embrace, curate, manage, right? That sort of, how do you get that, how do you fix that?
Sure. I think it really causes the team to initially step back. And first off, it's getting that aggregated data sets that Marty has talked about originally. And it's also thinking about really what are the key objectives that you want to reach on the outset. So what is the actual goal? To then be able to look at that clustering data to say, as you develop those personas, how do you want that persona to then turn into something either different or the same? How do you want to nurture that individual persona? And I think it's taking those individual clusters and data sets and having a strategy around exactly not only what's impacting it, as you talked about, maybe it's the cuts and the color, maybe it's even geolocalized weather. You know, does that Lunchable team end up walking outside and going out on those days where the weather's great? So I think it's deciding the strategy itself of which data sets need to be pulled together, what are the groupings of the personas, and then what are the objectives. And I think having the team collaborate around that begins to really set that path forward for the team.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think what we're finding is, well, we had a customer actually tell us the other day, and I love this quote, is, you know, they're like, you know, content is king. And there's no doubt about what's really king. But data is your queen, and your queen makes your strategic moves, right? So in terms of how you're, the decisions you're making and how you're moving forward. So, you know, as an example, and you talk a lot about, you know, this comparison to, well, the TV industry is finally in a full disruption, business model disruption. Ad rates, ad revenue was down last year. Cable providers lost 3.5 million subs, 5% of their audience last year, and they're predicting another 7% this year. So these companies need to make a move to be able to compete. Those dollars actually aren't going away. They're going to subscription services like a Netflix or a Hulu. They're going to other ad platforms with better data to target advertising, like a Facebook and a YouTube. And so what all of those companies use, Hulu is a perfect example. We had a friend who worked there. He did an audit for us. Of the 1,600 people that work at Hulu, 260 of them were dedicated to data every single day. Data analysts, data scientists, business analysts, full-time data people. 18% of their organization, all they did was look at data, you know, 40, 50 hours a week. That's the bar that media companies are going to have to match to provide a service to acquire those customers. Advertising side as well. You're going to have that targeted data to be able to match the effectiveness of a Google campaign, of a Facebook campaign, in terms of getting your message out and tying it back to causality around these actions.
So in the television and video space, right, I like to throw out these two words that are often conflated but are actually very different, and importantly so. Measurement, right? No shortage of that, reams of data from such.
Yep.
And currency, right? And in the television/video world, right, there's one, maybe 1.5 kind of agreed upon currencies. Arguably lowest common denominated, right? The Nielsen ratings and whatever ComScore can do digitally, and that's kind of it. Now there are some others out there trying, but there's a big conference going on in Miami literally today. It's the 4A's media conference, right? It's where all the media agencies and all the major advertisers, you know, are basically there kvetching about the world is, you know, changing and we got to do something about it. And when we talk about data and ratings and measurement in those contexts, you're going to have two different sides of the conversation. One is, what is the new Nielsen, right? Because Nielsen's not keeping up with set-top box data measurement and what's hitting the glass and over-the-top video, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's being viewed, watched, or consumed that Nielsen's sample-based methodology doesn't capture, right? And there's another group of people who go, I don't care about another currency or a lowest common denominated thing. I want my own proprietary flavors because I know my clients, I know the advertising I want to do. Just find me these audiences because I've already perfected that or learned that in digital. So I guess my general question to you guys is, is it really about trying to find a commonly denominated sort of alternative and or addition to the Nielsen's and the ComScores of the world, so that there's a playing field that everybody can more granularly understand and benefit from, or is that just waiting for for nothing when the world is all really digitally proprietary anyway, and marketers seem to want to kind of go after audiences themselves?
Yeah, so there's a couple of real interesting problems there. The industry absolutely needs some kind of currency, and the reason we need some kind of currency is that if you talk about advertising effectiveness, it's so easy to buy advertising on a Facebook or a Google, right? It's just, I fill out the form and I click through. And so TV does not have that capability today, and so we need a common currency to make our market efficient in terms of how we buy and how we rate and how we measure the effectiveness of our advertising. That's critical to be competitive as a marketplace to these alternatives in terms of reaching people. You're right, Nielsen is, lots of people complain about Nielsen. I think there's an interesting initiative going on with NBC Universal and a whole bunch of ad companies to introduce a new currency into the marketplace. But again, Facebook turned around in Q1, they are MRC accredited, so they are also looking for that same currency, and so we're going to have to raise the bar on that kind of effectiveness. The alternative is you go complete programmatic, which is targeting per audience level. Challenge with programmatic is when I just buy audience levels, every other digital market, it is a race to the bottom on ad rates. And so the traditional TV companies they have an innovator's dilemma, which is I'd love to sell per audience member, but at the same time, if I really truly do that, somebody's going to just buy that audience member for cheaper on the next site or the next media company and so you get a downward spiral. And so there's a real question about how we evolve the programmatic targeting of audience members and maintain that premium real estate, those premium CPMs that TV is getting today in their business model. Or maybe we just can't, and the TV industry is going to be a bit smaller than it is today over the next 5 to 10 years.
So that seems to me to be a blueprint, right, where this plethora of data, right, and the intelligence behind it, right, it seems like media companies engaged in video and television can't deal with this onslaught of data fast enough, right, because, to your point, business models hang in the balance, right? And if a television programmer who's been very good at monetizing by quote-unquote selling ads sort of in a sort of classic audience broad-based way, right, they need to know if and when how to sort of evolve that and change that, or worse, open up the spigot, so to speak, to allow multiple audiences to be purchased, right, without fear, and actually arguably for higher revenues in aggregate, right? So I guess I'll throw the sort of last semi-question to the two of you guys, right? How does that, based on your experiences, give us a sense of what you see in these media organizations generally. Is it fear? Is it action? Is it intelligent action? Or is it kind of just a jump ball right now? Because internally, I can imagine various media companies struggling with how to make these gold nuggets valuable.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, standardizing it across screen would be obviously ideal. I don't know that it's realistic anytime soon. I think from what we're seeing, which is really exciting, is there's kind of an initial push to quality content and taking advantage of, sort of moving away from this idea of, the consumer's been trained to skip a video ad as soon as given the opportunity, ignore, real estate on the screen where an ad would be or is, and creating content, putting content in front of the consumer that is quality, that they want to engage with. And so I think there's a ton of branded content opportunities out there. And, kind of this idea of moving away from kind of selling the minimum, right? Did we get a 3-second view? And instead saying, what are we trying to achieve? And if we want to get, seeing a lot around completion rates or 75, 90, 95% completion rates, and paying more for what it is you're actually trying to achieve, which is obviously driven by quality content. So, selfishly from our standpoint, that's a great thing. But I think, as it becomes, I don't know if we get to, any sort of real standard, but I think moving away from sort of selling and creating against the absolute minimums and moving more towards quality is, exciting for the industry as a whole.
I'll give you the last word, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing I would add is kind of flipping it around a little bit from the advertiser's view. And so I work with both, consumer packaging good companies as well as retailers, and what they're looking at right now is super hyper localization. How do I take all the data sets, because they already have massive data sets that they're already doing analytics against about their individual consumer. How do you not only try to drive that hyper localization within media, but also merge that with a lot of the data sets that these teams are bringing together today to bring that together to really optimize that advertiser's dollar.
Which may or may not be actually media, right? That's just a simple marketing
That's a great point.
Context, right? And within media, they need that, right? But if it's not media related, let's say it's a CRM effort or a promotion or something, right?
Yeah.
And they have to sort of coexist. Okay, so that's the second half hour. We don't have the second
we don't
half.
have another?
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your tolerance. Sorry we couldn't get any questions, but hopefully it was somewhat enlightening. Check out all three of these folks at the SPROCKIT booth, along with 17 plus other companies this year's class, as well as alumni from other classes. Tim Hanlon again, Vertere Group Chicago. Thank you.